Have you ever wondered what happens when power corrupts a person so completely that they believe themselves untouchable? What happens when someone uses their influence to destroy rather than build up? The year was approximately 1020 BC. The scorching Middle Eastern sun beat down on a small town called Nob, just north of Jerusalem. It was here that one of history's most chilling betrayals took place. A betrayal that would inspire one of the Bible's most pointed condemnations of arrogance and deceit. David, not yet king but already anointed by the prophet Samuel, was fleeing for his life from King Saul. Exhausted and desperate, he stopped at the tabernacle in Nob seeking food and weapons. The high priest Ahimelech helped him, unaware of the growing rift between Saul and David. But someone was watching. Someone whose name would become synonymous with treachery. Doeg the Edomite, Saul's chief shepherd, observed this interaction and saw an opportunity. Days later, standing before the increasingly paranoid King Saul, Doeg revealed what he had seen, but with a calculated twist, implying conspiracy where there was only compassion. Saul's response was swift and horrifying. He ordered the execution of the priests of Nob. When his own guards refused this unconscionable command, it was Doeg who stepped forward eagerly, slaughtering 85 priests, and then proceeding to kill the women, children, and even the livestock of the town. News of this massacre reached David, who was devastated, knowing his visit had been the catalyst. It was in this moment of grief and moral clarity that David penned the words of Psalm 52. A searing indictment of those who use their power for evil rather than good. This isn't just an ancient story. It's a timeless examination of how humans handle influence, and the destructive power of a tongue wielded without moral restraint. The themes of Psalm 52 echo through centuries, speaking to us today about truth, justice, and ultimate accountability. Today, we're going to explore this profound psalm, written in blood and grief more than 3,000 years ago, and discover why its message remains startlingly relevant in our world of social media influence, corporate power, and political maneuvering. Let's begin by examining the words of Psalm 52 themselves. Why do you boast of evil, you mighty hero? Why do you boast all day long, you who are a disgrace in the eyes of God? You who practice deceit, your tongue plots destruction. It is like a sharpened razor. You love evil rather than good, falsehood rather than speaking the truth. You love every harmful word, you deceitful tongue. Surely God will bring you down to everlasting ruin. He will snatch you up and pluck you from your tent. He will uproot you from the land of the living. The righteous will see and fear. They will laugh at you, saying, Here now is the man who did not make God his stronghold but trusted in his great wealth and grew strong by destroying others. But I am like an olive tree flourishing in the house of God. I trust in God's unfailing love forever and ever. For what you have done I will always praise you in the presence of your faithful people. And I will hope in your name, for your name is good. The historical context of this psalm is crucial to understanding its depth. The events that prompted David to write these words occurred during a tumultuous period in ancient Israel's history, the transition period between the reign of King Saul, Israel's first monarch, and David, who would become Israel's greatest king. Around 1030 to 1010 BC, Saul's reign was deteriorating as his mental health declined. Scholars and historians note that the biblical text describes symptoms consistent with paranoid delusions, with the king becoming increasingly unstable and suspicious. David, already anointed as the future king by the prophet Samuel around 1025 BC, had served in Saul's court both as a musician who soothed the troubled king and as a military commander who gained popularity after defeating the Philistine champion Goliath. This popularity triggered Saul's jealousy, and by approximately 1020 BC, David was forced to flee the royal court. For several years, he lived as a fugitive, moving through the wilderness of Judah with a small band of followers. It was during this period that David sought help at Nob. The massacre at Nob represented a shocking violation of religious sanctuary. The tabernacle at Nob had been established after the destruction of Shiloh, approximately 1050 BC, and before the construction of Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem, which would begin around 966 BC. It was a sacred site where the Ark of the Covenant was temporarily housed. The tragedy at Nob was particularly heinous for several reasons. First, the priests were descendants of Eli through Ithamar and represented a significant portion of the Aaronic priesthood. Their slaughter created a religious crisis. Second, the attack occurred at a consecrated site, violating ancient Near Eastern conventions about sanctuary. And third, Dog, as an Edomite, was not even an Israelite, making his eagerness to kill the Lord's priests even more significant in the narrative. Dog represents a particular type of evil in this story, the calculated informant who twists truth for personal gain without regard for consequences. Archaeological evidence from this period shows that high officials in ancient Near Eastern courts often competed for royal favor, sometimes through betrayal of rivals. Dog saw an opportunity to curry favor with an increasingly unstable king and seized it, regardless of the bloodshed that would follow. David's response in Psalm 52 isn't just personal anger, it's a theological reflection on the nature of evil and its ultimate fate. Let's break down this psalm section by section to understand its profound message. The psalm begins with a question that cuts to the heart of the matter. Why do you boast of evil, you mighty hero? The Hebrew word for mighty hero here is gibber, the same word used elsewhere to describe warriors of great valor. David's use is bitterly ironic. Dog sees himself as powerful and heroic, but his achievement is the slaughter of unarmed priests. It's a devastating critique of those who measure strength by their ability to harm rather than protect. This opening sets up the central theme of the psalm, the contrast between two types of power: destructive power that boasts in harming others versus the enduring power of godly character that flourishes even in adversity. In verses 2 to 4, David focuses on the weapon that initiated the tragedy, Dog's tongue. Your tongue plots destruction. It is like a sharpened razor. In ancient times, razors were dangerous implements, useful when properly applied but capable of causing serious harm. Similarly, words can build up or tear down. Linguistic studies of ancient Hebrew poetry reveal that this metaphor of the tongue as a weapon appears in multiple psalms, reflecting an understanding that speech carries tremendous power. The historical reality of royal courts in the ancient Near East makes this imagery particularly apparent. Records from Assyrian, Babylonian, and Egyptian courts from 1500 to 500 BC show that kings relied heavily on advisors and informants. A well-placed word could result in royal favor or devastating punishment. Dog used this dynamic to deadly effect. You love evil rather than good, falsehood rather than speaking truth. Here David moves from actions to character. The problem isn't just what Dog did, but what he loves. Recent psychological research on moral development highlights how our actions typically flow from our deepest affections. What we love shapes what we do. Dog didn't just speak deceitfully. He had developed a love affair with falsehood itself. In verses 5 to 7, the psalm shifts to divine judgment. Surely God will bring you down to everlasting ruin. This isn't personal vengeance. It's David's confidence in ultimate justice. Throughout ancient Near Eastern literature, including Mesopotamian texts from 2000 to 1000 BC, we find this theme of divine retribution against those who abuse power. The image of being uprooted was particularly powerful in an agricultural society where one's connection to land represented security and future prosperity. The phrase, "The righteous will see and fear," speaks to the instructive nature of justice. In ancient wisdom literature across cultures, from Egyptian teachings like the instructions of Amenemop circa 1100 BC, to biblical Proverbs, we find this understanding that observing the consequences of wickedness should inspire reverence for moral boundaries. The expression, "they will laugh," doesn't indicate cruel mockery but rather astonishment at how completely the tables have turned. Archaeological findings from the ancient Near East, including letters and court records from 1200 to 900 BC, revealed that dramatic reversals of fortune were often seen as divine judgment, especially when they befell those who had abused power. "Here now is the man who did not make God his stronghold but trusted in his great wealth and grew strong by destroying others." This summary of Doeg's fundamental error identifies his misplaced trust. Ancient economic records show that royal officials could amass significant wealth through their positions. Doeg likely enjoyed material rewards for his loyalty to Saul, perhaps including property confiscated from the priests he slaughtered. But material gain achieved through moral compromise proves ultimately worthless, a lesson taught repeatedly in wisdom literature across ancient cultures. The psalm takes a dramatic turn in verses 8 to 9. After focusing on the destructive path of the wicked, David presents the alternative. "But I am like an olive tree flourishing in the house of God." This olive tree metaphor carries profound significance. Olive trees in the Mediterranean world were symbols of longevity, prosperity, and peace. Archaeological excavations at sites across Israel have uncovered olive presses dating back to the early Bronze Age, 3300 to 2000 BC, demonstrating the tree's economic importance. But olive trees offer more than economic value. They can live for centuries, even millennia. Some olive trees still growing in the Mediterranean region today are over 2,000 years old. When David compares himself to an olive tree, flourishing in the house of God, he's creating a stark contrast with the uprooted fate of the wicked. While Doeg will be snatched from his tent and uprooted from the land of the living, David sees himself as planted in the most secure location possible, the house of God. This imagery would have resonated powerfully with ancient Israelites familiar with olive cultivation. Unlike many crops that require replanting each season, olive trees represent a multi-generational investment. They take years to mature but then produce fruit for centuries. This speaks to the lasting impact of a life built on integrity rather than expedience. "I trust in God's unfailing love forever and ever." Here David identifies the source of his security. The Hebrew word for unfailing love is "He's," a rich term encompassing loyalty, covenant faithfulness, and steadfast love. It appears nearly 250 times in the Hebrew Bible, and was a foundational concept in ancient Israelite understanding of God's character. Comparative studies with other ancient Near Eastern religious texts from 1500 to 500 BC show that this emphasis on divine loyalty and love was distinctive in Israelite theology. This trust isn't passive but leads to action. "For what you have done, I will always praise you in the presence of your faithful people." Communal worship was central to ancient Israelite religious practice, especially after the establishment of the monarchy around 1050 BC. Archaeological evidence from cult centers across ancient Israel reveals spaces designed for communal gatherings. By praising God publicly, David is both expressing gratitude and teaching others about God's faithfulness. "And I will hope in your name, for your name is good." In ancient Near Eastern cultures, a name represented one's essential character and reputation. Multiple ancient texts from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Canaan demonstrate how divine names were treated with special reverence as embodiments of the deity's nature. By hoping in God's name, David is expressing confidence in God's consistent character, a stark contrast to the deceptive character Doeg displayed. Let's now explore some deeper themes that emerge from this remarkable psalm, themes that transcend their ancient context and speak to our modern experience. First, Psalm 52 confronts us with the reality of evil that disguises itself as strength. Doeg appeared powerful in his moment of betrayal. He gained the king's approval and eliminated potential rivals. But the psalm unmasks this as false power, revealing that true strength isn't found in the ability to destroy but in moral integrity that endures. Throughout history, we've witnessed this pattern repeatedly. In the 20th century alone, we saw the rise and fall of totalitarian regimes that initially appeared invincible. The Third Reich, which Hitler boasted would last 1,000 years, collapsed after just 12 years, 1933 to 1945. Soviet communism, despite its military might, ultimately crumbled from within by 1991. More recently, corporate scandals like Enron, 2001, and Theranos, exposed in 2015, have shown how organizations built on deception eventually collapse, no matter how powerful they initially appear. Second, the psalm highlights the destructive power of deceitful communication. Your tongue plots destruction. It is like a sharpened razor. In David's time, misinformation spread more slowly but could still prove deadly, as the massacre at Nob demonstrates. In our digital age, when falsehoods can circle the globe in seconds, this warning takes on new urgency. Studies by the MIT Media Lab published in 2018 found that false news stories are 70% more likely to be retweeted than true stories, and reach their first 1,500 people 6 times faster. The damage caused by deliberate misinformation campaigns can be measured in lost lives, damaged reputations, and eroded social trust, making Doeg's destructive tongue seem almost quaint by comparison. The psalm's emphasis on loving truth rather than falsehood speaks directly to our post-truth era. When Oxford Dictionary selected post-truth as word of the year in 2016, they defined it as circumstances where objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. Psalm 52 reminds us that this isn't a new problem. The human tendency to embrace convenient falsehoods over uncomfortable truths has always been with us. Third, Psalm 52 offers a profound meditation on where we place our security. Here now is the man who did not make God his stronghold but trusted in his great wealth and grew strong by destroying others. Doeg's misplaced trust in wealth and royal favor ultimately proved worthless. Economic historians note that throughout human history, material prosperity has proven cyclical and unpredictable. The 2008 financial crisis wiped out approximately $8 trillion in U.S. household wealth in just 21 months, demonstrating how quickly apparent financial security can evaporate. Similarly, political favor is notoriously fickle, a reality as true in ancient royal courts as in modern democracies. The psalm offers an alternative: trust in God's unfailing love. This isn't presented as mere spiritual platitude but as practical wisdom. By anchoring identity and security in something transcendent rather than transient, one develops resilience against life's inevitable changes and challenges. Fourth, the contrast between being uprooted and flourishing like an olive tree speaks to the question of legacy. Recent psychological research on mortality salience, our awareness of eventual death, shows that humans universally desire to leave something meaningful behind. In a 2021 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, researchers found that reflecting on one's legacy significantly influenced ethical decision-making. Doeg may have gained temporary advantage through his betrayal, but his name has been preserved in Scripture only as a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, David's words continued to provide wisdom, comfort, and moral guidance nearly 3 millennia after they were written. This dramatic difference in legacy wasn't immediately apparent in their lifetimes. It required the perspective of history to become fully visible. Fifth, Psalm 52 offers profound insight into resilience amid injustice. When David wrote these words, he was still a fugitive. The massacre had occurred, Doeg remained in royal favor, and David had every human reason for despair. Yet instead of being defined by victimhood, he articulated a vision of himself, flourishing like an olive tree. Despite these circumstances, psychological studies on resilience, including landmark research by Dr. Emmy Werner, who followed children on Kauai, Hawaii for over 40 years, published from 1971 to 2001, have identified this capacity for positive self-definition amid adversity as a key factor in overcoming trauma. By refusing to see himself primarily as a victim, even while acknowledging the reality of victimization, David demonstrates remarkable psychological and spiritual resilience. This doesn't minimize the tragedy at Nob or suggest that justice isn't important. Rather, it shows that while waiting for external justice, internal flourishing remains possible. Research on survivors of various traumas consistently shows that finding meaning and purpose amid suffering significantly improves outcomes. In Viktor Frankl's groundbreaking work with Holocaust survivors, documented in his 1946 book, Man's Search for Meaning, he observed that those who maintained a sense of purpose were most likely to survive the camps. Let's now consider how the message of Psalm 52 might apply in our contemporary context. First, it challenges our culture's obsession with influence and impact divorced from moral content. In a world where social media metrics often value engagement over truth and where disruption is celebrated regardless of what's being disrupted, Psalm 52 asks the uncomfortable question: are we measuring success by our ability to build up or tear down? Recent research into organizational psychology has demonstrated that destructive behaviors often provide faster paths to influence than constructive ones. A 2017 study in the Journal of Applied Psychology found that employees who engaged in behaviors like spreading rumors and undermining colleagues often gained short-term power advantages. However, longitudinal studies show these gains typically collapse over time as reputation damage accumulates, exactly the pattern described in Psalm 52. Second, the psalm speaks to our information ecosystem. When David describes Doeg's tongue as like a sharpened razor that plots destruction, he could be describing certain aspects of our media environment where inflammatory content generates profit regardless of its accuracy or social impact. A 2021 study by researchers at New York University found that each word of moral outrage added to a social media post increased its res-hair rate by 13%, creating economic incentives for destructive communication. Psalm 52's warning about loving every harmful word speaks directly to this dynamic, challenging us to examine what types of communication we reward with our attention and engagement. Third, in a culture increasingly characterized by anxiety about the future, the Psalm's image of flourishing like an olive tree offers a compelling alternative to both naive optimism and cynical despair. David doesn't deny the reality of evil or pretend justice has already prevailed. Instead, he locates his security in something more durable than current circumstances. Mental health researchers have identified this capacity, maintaining hope while acknowledging difficulties, as crucial for psychological well-being. A comprehensive meta-analysis published in 2019 in the Journal of Positive Psychology found that realistic hope correlates strongly with resilience across diverse populations and challenges. Fourth, in our highly individualistic culture, Psalm 52 reminds us that our actions impact communities. The massacre at Nob didn't just harm individual priests, it devastated a religious community and damaged Israel's spiritual infrastructure. Similarly, Doeg's judgment is described in communal terms. The righteous will see and fear. Contemporary sociological research increasingly recognizes how individualistic frameworks fail to capture the network nature of human flourishing. When Robert Putnam published Bowling Alone, In 2000, documenting America's declining social capital, he helped spark renewed interest in how community connections undergird individual well-being. Psalm 52's communal perspective on both harm and healing speaks to this reality. Finally, in a culture that often struggles to believe in ultimate justice, the psalm presents a vision where moral accountability isn't just wishful thinking but the fundamental structure of reality. Recent studies in moral psychology, including Jonathan Haidt's work on moral foundations theory since 2004, suggest humans possess an innate sense that justice should eventually prevail, even when we disagree about what justice entails. As we conclude our exploration of this ancient psalm, let's consider its invitation to each of us. Regardless of our religious background, Psalm 52 challenges us to examine the kind of influence we're building, whether we're using our words and positions to create or destroy, whether we're placing our security in things that can endure or things that will inevitably pass away. The story of Doeg echoes through history as a warning, while David's response offers an alternative path, one characterized by truth-telling, proper perspective on power, and an identity rooted in something more enduring than circumstance. In your own sphere of influence, whether in your family, workplace, community, or online presence, what kind of legacy are you creating? Are you using your tongue like a sharpened razor, or are you speaking words that build up? Are you placing your security in things that can be snatched away, or in values that endure? Are you defining success by momentary advantage, or by lasting impact? These questions aren't just theoretical. They shape the texture of our daily choices and, ultimately, the story of our lives. The massacre at Nob reminds us that words and actions born of deceit can cause tremendous harm. Yet the Psalm's enduring message of hope reminds us that even in our darkest moments, we can choose a different path. Like olive trees that weather centuries of storms to produce fruit for generations, lives built on truth and love leave a legacy that outlasts any momentary advantage gained through deceit. In a world still struggling with the same human tendencies that Psalm 52 addresses, this ancient wisdom offers not just critique but invitation, an invitation to plant ourselves where we can truly flourish. 3,000 years after David penned these words in a moment of grief and moral clarity, their truth continues to challenge and inspire. May we have the wisdom to hear their message and the courage to live accordingly. Before you go, I want to personally invite you to be part of our growing community here at Prayer Universe. If this video touched your heart or brought you peace, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a prayer or message that can uplift your spirit. But most importantly, I'd love to hear from you. In the comments below, share just one word or phrase of motivation that this video inspired in you, whether it's hope, gratitude, peace, or something else. Your words matter deeply to us because they help guide the content we create for this channel. Together, let's build a space filled with faith, encouragement, and connection. Thank you for being here, and remember, every prayer counts. See you in the next one.